Hello and welcome to Metatron's Academy. Is it worth it to learn Italian in 2023? Let's find out. Hello noble ones and welcome to Metatron's Academy, the channel where we explore how to learn languages in the most fun and effective way possible. So, you love pizza, you love pasta, you like the culture, you've been thinking, hey, I'd really like to learn Italian. Is that a good idea specifically for you? Well, trying to learn a language is a process that takes time, effort, energy and a certain amount of study hours. So of course making sure that you make the right decision for your specific case is not just important, I'd say dramatically important if not essential. This is more of an informal chat, a little light-hearted discussion whereby I sort of give you advice and tips to help and understand if Italian is in fact the right choice for you, both as a native Italian speaker but also as a language teacher. This isn't a systematic evaluation of the Italian language, and I will be making a much more complex and in-depth linguistic video which will be a comprehensive analysis of Italian, but we'll leave that for a dedicated video. The first point I'd like to make is, I'd like to ask you a question. Where are you coming from when it comes to your own personal experience and connection to the language? First of all, what's your first language? Because if you speak a Romance language, then it's going to be a lot easier for you to pick Italian up as a second language than it would be if you're an Anglophone speaker, or even worse, if your first language is an Asian language. So make sure to answer that question in the comments. What is your first language if you are considering learning Italian? The second question I'd like to ask you is, why do you want to learn Italian? This is important because if your answer is, I just want to learn it because I like it, but you don't have any specific expectations when it comes to business or using it as a way to make money, support your family, a career, then honestly you don't really need much to justify your decision. The only problem that we might have in this situation is if you do want to use your language skills for work and you're just choosing Italian because you like it, well, there might be other language that could be more useful when it comes to a business career connected to that language. But if you're not interested in that, if you already have a job or you have a completely different career and you don't need to rely on your language skills, or maybe you already speak a second language and this is going to be your third and you just want to do it for personal growth, you like the culture, you're enjoying it, you like the sound of it, you like the idea of being able to speak fluently in Italian, then you don't need to justify it in any other way. Feel free to pick Italian. Doesn't matter how long it takes you. It doesn't even matter where you're coming from or what sort of connections you have. It's just your hobby. It's something you do because you want to do. Feel free to pick it up. But if your answer is, I want to do it because I want to work with it, I want to make business with it, then there is a whole range of data that we're going to discuss from this point onward that can help you understand whether this is a good choice for you or not. The first piece of data that we're going to discuss is this one. How many people speak Italian? This is the first part where you need to start being careful when it comes to the information and data you gain when you Google things up. That is because you will easily find lots of numbers. For instance, in general, you will see that the number of Italian speakers varies from 55 million to 68 million. Now, that is a big gap. And depending on the language you choose, the gap in question will be even bigger. So it's difficult for people who don't have a base in social linguistics or in general language studies to really understand how to read these numbers. And you shouldn't base your choice just on the first number you see on the first website you click. That is because, first of all, these numbers vary. And again, as I say, they vary a lot. Like for example, in French, you'll find a website telling you that 90 million people speak French and a website that will tell you that 200 million people speak French. And when it comes to Spanish, you will find websites that tell you 368 million speakers of Spanish worldwide, and then you'll have a website saying almost 500 million. So what's up with that? And why do these numbers change? Well, the reason is because very much depends on what sort of statistics are they trying to come up with. It's not that one of the numbers is wrong or one of the numbers is right. It's simply that are these L1 speakers? So do they speak it as a first language? Then of course the number will be smaller. Are these L2 speakers? So they speak it fluently, they speak it well, but it's a second language and of course the number is going to grow. For instance, French and Spanish have definitely, regardless of which one of these you see, more speakers than Italian. When it comes to first language speaker and when it comes to second language speaker, even more. But that also doesn't necessarily mean that then choosing French or Italian is definitely always the best option for you. Say, for example, that you were moving to Europe and you were thinking, hey, there are a lot of French speakers, like regardless of whatever number you choose, there are millions and millions of speakers of French. So I'm going to move to Europe. I want to learn French. Well, keep in mind that of the big number of people who speak French worldwide, only 40% of those speakers are actually in Europe. In the sense that a lot of people who speak French are in Africa. People who speak French are in Canada. So if you're moving to Europe, but you're moving to a country that is, for example, close to Italy, your choice of French is not necessarily the best choice. Now, it goes without saying that if you're moving to Italy, planning to move to Italy, then Italian is going to be the best choice, just as much as if you move to Mars, Martian is going to be the best choice. It doesn't matter where you go, you want to pick the language that the country speaks. But Italian is not a language that is only spoken in Italy. For example, Italian is the official language of the Vatican. So if you go to the Vatican, Italian is going to be the main language you're going to speak. Italian is also an official language in the Republic of San Marino. It's a language spoken in a couple of counties, both in Croatia and Slovenia. It is a very common language, probably third language spoken in Albania and in some of the former colonies in Africa. So if you go to Libya, if you go to Ethiopia, Somalia as well, some people will be able to use Italian, and I have tested this myself. I've met a few people from Ethiopia and we could communicate in Italian. Not everyone speaks Italian there, but definitely you will find little chunks of population in these areas that also speak Italian, and most importantly, it is one of the official languages in Switzerland. The Swiss case is very complicated and complex, but to make it simple for people who have never been to Switzerland, I'd like to say that as an Italian, I have first direct experience. I've been to Switzerland 5 times and I've been to all 3 areas, because Switzerland is divided into 3, we say cantoni in Italian, let's say 3 sections. You have the German speaking, the French speaking and the Italian speaking. Obviously the Italian speaking is the one that connects to Italy in the south, the French speaking is the one that connects to France, and the German speaking is the one that connects to Germany. When I went to the southern part of Switzerland, the section where they speak Italian, I could just enter any shop, supermarket and use Italian as if I were in Italy. Basically no difference. Their Italian sounds very much like a northern Italian accent, but that's great, you could use Italian no problem. But when I went to the German speaking part, I could only use Italian once. Now maybe I was unlucky, but in the majority of cases people spoke German. We could use a little English, sometimes we could use great English, kind of depending on the person. I could only use Italian once. I would tell them, like, do you speak Italian? In the majority of cases, I didn't find people that spoke Italian. It only happened once in the middle of the street, and once with a friend of mine who was actually actively learning Italian, so yes, she could speak Italian pretty well. Another interesting piece of trivia is that there are 1 million speakers of Italian in America, in the United States. 1 million is not much compared to the total population of America, but still it's, I think, significant enough, particularly because all of these speakers are not spaced out in an even way, but of course they're mostly concentrated and focused in Little Italy, in Little Italy's and Italian communities. So my personal experience when it comes to New York, for example. So you're learning Italian and you live in New York. Are you going to be able to use standard Italian in Little Italy, New York? Forget about what people say in forums, because I've seen people with my own eyes saying, oh, people in Little Italy use an Italian-American variant, and so if you speak standard Italian, you won't be able to communicate. They don't know what they're saying, and they're just trying to sound smart, but they don't speak the language, so they could never test it. I could test it. And let me tell you this, every time I go to New York with my wife, we always go to Little Italy. First time I went to Little Italy, it took me not even an hour to find not 1 but 2 restaurants where I could just sit down and speak Italian, because people there were Italian from Italy and we could just communicate as if I were in Italy. Sometimes you'll have, the waiter will speak Italian, other times the waiter won't speak Italian, but they'll tell you, oh yeah, the owner is Italian, and the owner comes by, and my wife could practice a little bit, and she could say, mi dai un caffè macchiato per favore, and then the guy would be like, ah, parli italiano, brava, and that kind of stuff that always happens when you use Italian with Italians. It did happen once that I met a kid, and his grandfather was from Sicily. The kid didn't necessarily speak Italian, but he knew a couple of words, and so of course we exchanged a few words that are very famous, like grazie, buonasera, buongiorno, but then he reverted back to English for communication. Of course, if they were born in America, some will speak Italian, some will speak a different form of Italian, but you can also find plenty of Italians who live in Little Italy and you can use your language and practice your language skill with. It is also important to say that if you live in Argentina or you live in Brazil, there are plenty of Italian speakers. I believe, if I'm not wrong, that São Paulo, Brazil has a huge concentration of Italians living there, so there is also that to keep in mind. Now, how close are, for example, Italian and French, or Italian and Spanish, or Italian and Portuguese. Well, I'll probably make a dedicated video, but I would like to kind of tell you a little bit of information when it comes to this to help you choose and select the language you prefer. So when it comes to similarity coefficients, the level of lexical similarity between Italian and French is 89%, and the level of lexical similarity between Italian and Spanish is 82%. Now, when it comes to Portuguese, I believe the Portuguese and Spanish are actually quite close. But when it comes to Italian and Portuguese, when it's in the written form, I can understand more. When it's in spoken form, it's kind of harder for me to understand. I'm not sure. I'll have to test this, and I'll test it and I'll make a dedicated video. I believe it's easier for me to understand Brazilian Portuguese than European Portuguese, which is kind of weird because it's in Europe. But I don't want to double down on that because I want to do more testing. But what do these numbers actually mean? So if you are, say you're French and you want to learn Italian, well, a lot of words sound similar. Of course, that doesn't mean that you can just not study and understand everything. It very much depends on how much of a complicated topic you are tackling. But when it comes to learning a language, languages that are very close are a lot easier to pick up. And what about if you're English? Well, remember that the English language has a 40% base of Latin words, or Latin-rooted words. So even though English is not a Romance language, it's a Germanic, still a big chunk, almost half of all the words you use come from Latin, which means there is a strong connection even with Italian. It's pretty easy for me as an Italian to learn mentalité, to say mentality, mentalità, but as you can see, even English is quite similar. So mentalità, mentality. You really need to remember to repeat it twice. Now in Japanese, that's kangaekata. So yes, it's a lot harder for a Japanese to remember mentalità than it is for an English speaker to remember it, because of the fact that you have the word mentality. Interestingly enough, if you are an educated speaker in English, you read a lot, it's going to be easier for you to remember words in Italian, because a lot of words that we commonly use in Italian, my wife notices this all the time, they have a counterpart in English, but usually when you use it in English, it's a big word. For instance, in English you say wedding, you say marriage, but you do have the word matrimony, kind of an upper register. When in Italian it's matrimonio, so for us it's just a way to say wedding. And there are a lot of words like this, so you hear a word and you're like, oh, I know that word, it's a big word in English, and in Italian it's just common. Another couple of pros when it comes to Italian is that it's a language of music and it's the language of love, or is it? A little controversial on that one, I'll get to it in a minute. When I say it's a language of music, is because if you have ever studied music, piano, then you'll notice that you will have already learned a lot of words in Italian, like forte, presto, prestissimo, adagio, allegro, allegretto. All of these words, when you study music, they are all in Italian, and they are adjectives, and you can use them. For example, let me teach you one this is gonna blow your mind. If you've studied music, forte, it talks about the volume, right? Forte is a high volume. And that's interesting because forte also means strong in Italian. So we're like forte. If you're a strong man, you are forte. Now here's the fun part. In everyday speech, particularly between the youth, if you say forte, it's our way to say cool. So basically, someone shows you something that is pretty cool, a new game, something that they can do. As an Italian, we say forte, forte. We are saying strong. At the end of the day, you use it just like cool. So if you already knew that word from your musical training, well, now you know that you can use it in everyday language to talk about the strength of someone, but also to just say cool in everyday language. Now, is it the language of love? Well, this title, Italian and French have been battling it for it the entirety of the time. It's difficult to say. As an Italian, I want to say, to me, they're both the language of love, but apparently they did a poll and they asked English speakers which one to them sounded more like the language of love, and apparently Italian won as the sexiest language. I'll leave that one up to you. Let me know what you think in the comments. And also, if you like the Academy, make sure to join it. So, having considered all of these numbers, should you tackle Italian if it's for business? Well, if it's for business only, and you also have a chance to select something like French or Spanish or even Mandarin, I would suggest to choose one of the others. Unless you have specific plans to work in Italy or with Italy. But if there is any sort of connection, you're going to move there, you like the culture, you like the country, you've got friends, you want to make friends, then absolutely choose Italian, because it is a language that it's spoken, as you can see, in by quite a lot of people. You almost have 70 million speakers. And when it comes to actually objective difficulty, so removing any starting point, just objective grammar difficulty and pronunciation difficulty, my opinion is that even though the grammar is complex, it's not as hard as German. It's definitely not as hard as Latin. And I think that even though you have to dedicate quite a lot of hours into fully understanding the grammar and how it works, you're not going to spend a lot of hours into learning how to read it, because luckily reading in Italian is extremely easy, particularly when you compare it not only to Japanese, Chinese, which are obviously extremely difficult, but even to English and French. Spanish and Italian are very similar when it comes to language difficulty, when it comes to reading. French is already quite a bit harder than Italian when it comes to spelling. And English is harder than Italian when it comes to spelling, no questions asked. Even though Italian is not as spoken as Mandarin, Spanish or French, it still is a fully institutionalized language, which means that you will find all sorts of materials. When it comes to literature, when it comes to movies, when it comes to films, when it comes to games, it's a language that it's used in 26 countries, not as an official language, but it is used and found as speakers with higher and lower numbers in 26 countries, and you can find a lot of material, books, grammar books, pronunciation guides, full-on tutorials, full-on classes, including the class that I will be publishing on this channel. So it's definitely a language that is not difficult to pick up. Now, should you learn standard or should you learn one of the many dialects that people speak in Italy? Considering also the fact that over 50% of all Italians also speak their own regional dialect. Well, to answer this question, specifically about the difference between standard and dialect, I'll make a dedicated video very soon. In fact, let me know if you're interested in learning more about Italian dialects and not just the standard. But for this one, I just want to say, absolutely, pick up standard Italian. If it's a language you like, you'll be able to communicate with everyone in Italy in the sense that they'll be able to understand you. Now, whether you'll be always able to understand them will very much depends on how much of a dialectophone we are talking about. But then again, I'll leave that specific detailed answer for the dedicated video. All right, I hope that this was a brief informal chat about whether or not you should pick up Italian. I hope that this helped. If you did, please remember thumbs up and remember to subscribe and join Metatron's Academy. Thank you very much for watching, and remember, the Metatron has spread his wings. Goodbye.